dead Celestials are raining from the sky, and Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America jump into action. What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is an I Review, a show where I go over a comic book, its story, its art, give you my impressions, and let you know whether it's something you should go back to the comic book shop for or not. Make sure you subscribe to get more of these every single week. The book that I want to talk about right now is Avengers Number 2, which is still part of Marvel's Fresh Start, and what we've got is the reuniting of this holy trinity of Thor, Captain America, and Iron Man, and right now they've got a big problem from space, and that is going to be the final host as well as the Celestials, and Jason Aaron is giving us a much better indicator of exactly what's going to be going on in this storyline and who the real villain is. But let's dive in and see what he's got for us. Avengers Fresh Start from Jason Aaron and Ed McGuiness promised big things when it debuted, and it delivered, with dead Celestials raining from the sky, but now we're dealing with the aftermath of those things. Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor are ready to take off, but we do notice that the narrator has changed. With an Asgardian and green tint, it feels like somebody a little bit different than what we're expecting, and given his mode of speech and what he talks about, I can only assume that this is going to be Loki that is telling us the story and showing us the worldview through his own eyes. Talking about how simple it was to prod the big three of Thor, Iron Man, and Captain America back into the group, but adding in a few others as well, like Black Panther, Doctor Strange, Carol Danvers, and then a few wild cards like Ghost Rider. And when we see Robbie Reyes as Ghost Rider, we are back in LA, and he's just smashing these bugs up against the street, up against the Hell Charger, and he's really having a tough time about it, standing outside of his home while his brother is currently in there, who still doesn't know that he's Ghost Rider. And that's not even the biggest thing. The Hell Charger fires back up, and he takes off, headed towards whatever kind of issues they're having across the Earth. Of course, that leads us into the other wild card, and that is Jennifer Walters. So as she stands there on the side of the Hudson River, looking at this giant dead Celestial, she reaches out for it, almost tempted to become part of what this is. But she's still kind of dealing with that whole temperament issue after going into her coma, after losing Bruce before he's magically kind of resurrected. We don't know how much she can control that Hulk nature until those bugs creep across the skull of the Celestial, leaving her no choice but to transform. Busting out of her shoes and barely keeping her running gear on, now we see the Hulk come back. So it feels even more like an Avengers book. It might not necessarily be Bruce Banner, but that familiar shade of green is something that you really want to see inside that Avengers team. And then this beautiful two-page splash shows up where we see the overall threats. Jennifer Walters fighting against these various bugs. You see the final host in a showdown with Thor, Iron Man, Captain America's inside a Quinjet flying towards them, but unfortunately nothing that they're doing is having any kind of effect whatsoever. But that's when the game changes a little bit. We see Jennifer Walters smashing these bugs, but then all of a sudden this giant finger comes crashing down next to her. It seems like Esson, this giant Celestial, still alive and is trying to communicate with her. She's trying to understand it. She sees this word in her head, cure, and then all of a sudden, zip, she's gone. Until she sees Ghost Rider's car barreling down on her, ready to smash her to pieces, but then we flash back over to Iron Man. Iron Man is taking the battle to the Celestial. So is Thor, but Thor is not necessarily having any kind of success. You know, Tony has been reiterating how jealous he is of this. There's all kinds of different pieces that have been put together to create these final hosts, and they're just not doing anything. The armor is essentially impenetrable, and what he wants is he wants some sort of psychic there, somebody like Jean Grey, or maybe an Eternal, to come and try and communicate with these things. Maybe they're peaceful, but Thor is just getting smacked around, showing that maybe they're not. But Carol Danvers is there to kind of capture him, and has a plan of her own. So she grabs what she's, I believe, calling Omega-level warp grenades, which are these kind of destination points that she's going to throw at the Celestial and transport it into the sun to see if that has some kind of effect. Bouncing back over to where we are in the desert, we see the Hulk smashing up the Charger, just crushing it to pieces as it blows fire into her face. And that's where the internal dialogue of Robbie Reyes kind of disconnects for me in terms of what he's trying to say versus what he's thinking. And it seems like he's having this kind of like conversation back and forth with him. But we do get this great full page of Jennifer Walters going full on green rage machine, getting ready to smash Robbie Reyes' Ghost Rider into the pavement. Iron Man and Carol Danvers are headed back up into the atmosphere, headed directly towards the final host, with Steve Rogers close to being there until the final host just eviscerates his entire Quinjet, leaving him suspended in space, writhing in agony as it's kind of controlling the matter around him. Thor joins in on the battle, and then also that giant Celestial that came to life in front of Jennifer Walters, it's back into the battle too, just landing haymakers on this thing. But the battle rages on between between Hulk and Ghost Rider. If you remember inside Marvel Legacy, Ghost Rider's already had a big fight inside this series, dealing with Starbrand, ultimately giving him the penance stare, and then taking him from this Earth, basically destroying him, which is a brand new thing for Robbie Reyes, and he's still dealing with it. This is not the big problem that Jennifer and Ghost Rider have. The combat is something else, but they are also being beset by all of these different beasts, cockroaches from beneath Earth that are rising up and are threatening the rest of the populace. The ones that Doctor Strange and Black Panther are fighting, and they're kind of absent from this story, so it possibly means that in issue number 3 we're going to see a little bit more of them. But as we finish things out, we see what looks to be narrator Loki calling the Avengers out on what seems to be a bit of a hypocrisy. You know, what do they have to avenge? What are they really avenging? Have they been hunted to the edge of the cosmos by their own family, ultimately scorned? No, that's what's happened to Loki. So while he has yet to make his appearance, we see these last Avengers currently in stasis being held in a variety of different places as Loki introduces himself as possibly the greatest Avenger. He knows the history of these things. He found out about how Odin in Avengers 1 million BC defeated that mad celestial and was going to call forward the final host. And now global extermination is for the final host to avenge this great atrocity. And that concludes Avengers number 2. So while I said Avengers number 3 is probably going to focus a bit more on Black Panther and Doctor Strange, overall in this story, we do get a lot of action. It's very heavy action. We get a little bit better indication of how Jason Aaron is going to be writing these individual characters and their interactions. He's got a very different way of writing Captain America, having him be just as quippy as Tony Stark, and Tony Stark considerably less quippy than what he normally would be. It's just one of those things where it's not as familiar to me. The writing of these characters isn't necessarily exactly what I expect, and Thor, of course, he writes Thor very well when it comes to that character. He's been writing him for a couple years, so he's got a very solid voice for him. The interesting aspect is how these other characters are going to fold into this overall story and what Avengers 3 and then the future of this storyline brings, because we're dealing with a cataclysmic event right off the bat. But I want to know what you guys think about Avengers number 2, so hit me up in the comments down below and we can start that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.